Hey guys, welcome this week with Bob and Chris. There's been a bunch of breaches. If you haven't seen the news, we're not going to get into the specifics ones, but one of the things Chris and I wanted to talk about today was really um, having people with the right permissions on your networks in your emails and they've got the business owner running as an administrator on the computers, or they have all the users running as administrator, or even have the global the email account set up with global administrators. And Chris has seen some really bad stuff with that happening. So I figured we'd talk about talk about some of the best practices and some of the risks of really being there. So
Yeah, I think let's start at the device first. Let's move our way up, shall we?
sure.
So when we run as a user on our device, if we run as administrator, whatever we run can make administrative changes to that device. Period. For all other users, when you run just as a user, you're severely limited on what you can make changes to. Now, it's not going to affect other users that use that device, and this comes into play with kind of like what we're talking about. If you're an administrator on a computer and you can make whatever changes you want, you can run ransomware, you can run other things, and it'll launch and it'll install for the entire machine. Whereas if you're a normal user, it might not even be able to install properly. So we start there. We now move up to what we can now move up into. Let's say you have a domain of some sort, like Active Directory.
Well, hold on, wait a minute. So we've got, if I used to be under the mindset a long time ago. It's like, okay, I'll let people be an administrator on their machine. If they blow it up, we're just going to rebuild it.
Yeah.
But now, with the way ransomware and attacks are happening, once somebody installs something on that computer, the computer trusts it.
Yeah, and let's take an example of like a rat, so a remote access Trojan. If you're not an administrator, it can only run under your user context. So if it can't make changes that can make it permanent, if you reboot, it's probably gone, or it's just running under your user. However, if it's permanent, it won't matter unless you know that it's there. If you just hand that device off to somebody else, they could start collecting information on somebody else too. So we have to be very careful and have to, like, we do a ton of monitoring on when devices are being changed, on when things are being changed on the device by either users or administrators, just so we can kind of keep that under wraps. But that's one of the challenges we see, is that people are installing stuff that ends up leading to malware because they run as administrators on their machines. And that's not an end all be all. Like, it's not going to stop all malware because you're not running as administrator. It's just a good practice to get away from.
Right, but the other thing is when someone's running as administrator and they download something and it installs,
Yep.
They might be getting a pop-up that says, "Do you want to install this?" And when you approve it, your antivirus now might have just said, "Okay, they want it. We're going to let it happen."
Yeah, or worse, the antivirus doesn't even know it's some sort of piece of malware, and you just installed it, and then all of a sudden you look and your antivirus is turned off.
Yeah.
So, there's just good practices to have is not run as administrator. You can take that up to being on, like I said, Active Directory domain. So most of the time we see this in companies that have maybe 10 people or more. They run Active Directory. Maybe they ran Small Business Server from back in the day, either 2003, 2008, 2011. And you look in domain admins, and domain admins are keys of the kingdom. And there might be 12 people in there. There might be 15 people in there because they decided to make everybody domain admin. Here's the reality. If you're a domain admin, you have rights to every computer on that network. So if somebody gets compromised, every single computer can be compromised for that one account. And we just did a vulnerability scan assessment for a company that had 80 users. They had 40 being domain admins. Half of them were domain admins, which means half of them were a risk to the business of basically either deploying ransomware or malware or anything. If one account got compromised, if one person clicked on a phishing email, their account
had access to every computer. It had access to every device.
Every device, every computer, every file share, everything. And
it even had in that case, it even had the ability to set stuff up to run on the other computers when they came back to the office and plugged them in.
Yep. Could modify group policy. So even if they didn't have rights to certain machines, so that when they maybe they got taken away. Once that group policy was edited, even if they disabled that account, it was actually going to deploy ransomware.
So, so the best practice that we've been following is really not to have anyone be an administrator on their PCs. They don't need it. And coming up with a process to either get remote support teams to install it, or depending on users, sometimes we'll actually give them a special account to use if they really need it.
It's basically least privilege. You give somebody the privilege, enough privilege to do their job, and that's it. No more, no less. It goes to file permissions. It goes up to 365, like you talked about. If you make somebody a global admin, they can make billing changes. They can just buy a bunch of accounts if they want to.
People always think about we talk about breached email, email breaches, and when someone gets breached that's a global admin, like you said, they get access to the Office 365 account. But one of the things I saw last week was a global admin that got compromised, and people don't necessarily realize that the global admin account is allowed to access more than just Office 365. It can actually log into Windows, Microsoft Azure environment and actually create new services. You've got the subscription already there.
Or give yourself access to everybody's mailbox.
Yep, that's what we saw.
We had a call last year from a prospect, and this is Google, and they had a business email compromise on a Google account that was an administrator, and they didn't give us access to that account. We kind of helped them pull the logs and submit everything to their insurance. Well, they came back 6 months later, to your point, and they were like, we got all these charges on our credit card and we couldn't figure out what it was. Well, what they did is the attackers went into Google Cloud Platform and set up a virtual machine that was billing $650 a month to a credit card, and they didn't even notice it on their credit card until 6 months later. So all in, I think they were out. It was 6 months, but I think there's some other charges. I think there might have been another one. It ended up being like something like $8,000 of total billing that they had to pay for, and then they had to call the FBI because that machine ended up being used to launch other attacks inside the United States. So that was a fun.
Well, they're lucky that they called the FBI and the FBI didn't come knocking at their door.
That's true. Yeah, they explained the situation. They gave them the report that we gave them for the email compromise, and it was all good. And the FBI worked with Google to do forensics on the machine, so then we were out of the loop at that point. But yeah, it's just least privilege is where you want to be. You only got to give people the permissions they need. And look, Bob and I both know there's owners out there who say we need to be an administrator. No, you don't. You can have administrative privileges. You can have credentials. You can have accounts that are administrative. Lock them up, put them in a safe, store them in a vault. Never use them unless you absolutely need them, because you do own the business. You should have access to that, but you shouldn't be using them. There's no
absolutely. And one of the things that we don't want to see you with a global admin account and actually using that account actively with email. Like Chris said, we'll take an account, we'll set it up for you. We'll do break the glass access so that if something happens and you need it, you've got it. But here's the thing: if you click on something because you made a mistake or you got hit by a phishing email, and phishing emails are really good, and those bad guys get access, well, you're probably not going to know it for a while. And like Chris said, they can go in and get access to everybody's mailbox, put up rules and do other things. So that's part of the monitoring and additional security features that we layer on top of both Office 365 and G Suite.
Yeah, it's really about detection, right? We need to be able to detect when things are happening like that.
Sure.
So if we can go back to NIST on that, we can talk about NIST CSF, cybersecurity framework, but we need to be able to detect when things like that are happening, when people are using credentials they shouldn't be using. And that starts with 365. It goes all the way down to even local computers. So the more visibility we have, the easier it is to stop attacks, the thwart attacks, and to keep your business safe.
So Chris, if people have been running with administrator, and even if they're not sure if they're running with administrator, would you recommend doing a risk assessment? Or how often should we do a risk assessment?
100% should be doing a risk assessment, at least annually. Almost every business should be doing it annually. I'd be hard pressed to find a business that shouldn't be. If you're in a compliance-driven sector, you might want to think about doing it quarterly, maybe at least semi-annual.
Cool.
Because things change, right? Like everybody's rate of change is different. So if your business is changing at a significant pace, if there's significant changes, you might want to just trigger that as a risk assessment or vulnerability assessment, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you never know what your employees have been doing or what other changes might have happened. There could have been software updates that made changes which could cause another breach. And like I said, Chris and I both have a little quiz for really looking at your risk. So click below, and you can go to risk.metromsp.com or risk.techygurus.com and check out your vulnerability and find out now before the bad guys do.
Yeah,
that's all I got for this week.
And we're gonna ask again. Comment below, DM us ideas you want to talk about. We're coming up with ideas weekly for everybody, but we want to talk about what people want to hear or answer questions that people have. So if you have any kind of questions, just drop us a question. We'll actually answer it live on one of these videos. So
perfect.
Yeah.